The church doors swung open at exactly 11:03 a.m., and Nora Callahan stood frozen at the entrance in a dress that cost more than her first car. Not as the bride, as a guest. She had spent 4 months planning every detail of this wedding. The ivory roses shipped from Ecuador, the string quartet that had rehearsed Pachelbel's canon 3 times a week for 6 weeks, the custom Vera Wang gown hanging in the bridal suite upstairs that still had her measurements sewn into the lining. She had done all of that, and now she stood in a pale green bridesmaid dress, holding a bouquet she did not choose, watching the man she loved walk toward the altar with her cousin Sienna on his arm. No, that was wrong. Sienna was walking toward the altar, and Kenji was already standing at it, waiting, his jaw set with the kind of deliberate calm Nora had only ever seen on him when he was closing a business deal. He was wearing the charcoal suit she had picked, the burgundy pocket square she had folded herself 3 weeks ago in their apartment, laughing because he kept getting it wrong. Their apartment, except her key no longer worked in the lock. She had discovered that yesterday morning, standing in the hallway with an overnight bag, thinking she had just forgotten to oil the lock. The organ music swelled, and 300 guests rose to their feet, and Nora Callahan walked down the aisle behind her cousin, carrying flowers and a smile so tight it felt like a wound. She had not told anyone. That was the most absurd part. Her mother was in the third row, dabbing her eyes, genuinely moved, having no idea that 6 weeks ago, Nora had been the one choosing the floral centerpieces with the wedding planner. Her Aunt Patricia, Sienna's mother, was weeping openly in the front pew. Even Nora's closest friend Dana, who was walking beside her, had only found out the truth 4 days ago and had spent those 4 days begging Nora to say something, to do something, to at least not show up. Nora had shown up anyway. She needed to see it. She did not fully understand why, but some part of her that was still functioning on pure adrenaline and stunned disbelief needed to see Kenji Ito stand at an altar in front of God and 300 people and choose Sienna Callahan. She needed it to be undeniably, irreversibly real before she could begin to process what had been done to her, what they had both done to her. She found her position at the altar beside the other bridesmaids and turned to face the congregation, and that was when she saw him. He was seated in the fourth row on the groom's side, though it was immediately obvious he was not connected to anyone here. He sat with the particular stillness of a man who was observing rather than participating, one arm resting along the back of the empty seat beside him, his eyes moving slowly across the room in the methodical way of someone cataloging information rather than admiring decoration. He was dressed in a dark suit that was quietly, unmistakably expensive. No tie. The top button of his shirt open in a way that should have looked casual, but instead looked like a choice. His jaw was sharp. His expression was unreadable. And he was looking directly at her, not at Sienna, who was gliding down the aisle in the dress that had been designed for Nora's body. Not at Kenji, who was now stepping forward to take Sienna's hand. At Nora. At the exact moment she was working very hard to keep her face composed, this stranger with dark eyes and a stillness that felt almost dangerous was watching her the way a person watches something they do not yet have a name for. She looked away first. The ceremony proceeded. The vows were the ones Nora had written. She recognized every line. She and Kenji had spent an entire Sunday on the couch, her feet in his lap, both of them with laptops open, laughing about how sentimental they were being. She had written, "I choose you not because love is easy, but because you make me want to do the hard things." She heard Kenji say those words now in his calm, measured voice. And she heard the congregation respond with a collective inhale of appreciation, and she pressed her thumbnail into her palm until the sensation gave her something else to focus on. She did not cry. She had promised herself that much. The stranger in the fourth row did not look away from her for the entire ceremony. She knew because she checked. Not often, but enough to confirm it was not accidental. When the officiant said the words, "You may kiss the bride," and Kenji kissed Sienna, and the church erupted into applause, Nora clapped with everyone else. Her hands moved mechanically. The smile stayed. Dana, standing 2 spots away, shot her a look that contained an entire conversation, and Nora gave the smallest shake of her head. Not here. Not now. The recession began, and she took the arm of Kenji's best man, Greg Lawson, a pleasant, an oblivious man who smelled like too much cologne and immediately began talking about how beautiful the venue was. She murmured agreement and walked, and as she passed the fourth row, the stranger stood. Not to leave, just stood. And as she passed him, close enough that she could have reached out and touched the sleeve of that quietly expensive suit, he said nothing. He simply looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes, and she saw something in them that she had not expected. He was angry, not at her. She understood that immediately, instinctively, the way you understand some things before language catches up to them. He was angry on her behalf, which was impossible because he did not know her. He did not know anything about what had just happened in this church. Or maybe she thought he knew exactly what had happened. Maybe he had seen it all on her face. She walked past him and out into the pale October sunlight and kept moving. The reception was at the Hargrove Estate, 40 minutes outside of the city, a venue so stunning it genuinely hurt to look at it, knowing she had been the one to book it. She rode in the bridal party van, listening to the other bridesmaids discuss the ceremony, and said almost nothing. Dana sat beside her with their shoulders touching, which was enough. The estate's main hall had been transformed into something from a magazine. The ivory roses were everywhere. The lighting was exactly as she had specified, warm, golden, slightly dim at the edges to make everything feel intimate. The tables were set with the linens she had chosen. The menu was the one she and Kenji had tasted together in the chef's private kitchen 4 months ago, laughing over too many glasses of wine, feeding each other spoonfuls of things they could not pronounce. She found her seat at the bridal table, directly to Sienna's left, because Sienna had made her the maid of honor. That particular detail still caused something in Nora's chest to shift dangerously whenever she thought about it. Sienna had called her 2 months ago, voice warm and careful, and said, "I want you to be there for me on the most important day of my life." And Nora, who had only known half of the truth at that point, had said yes because she was still trying to understand what was happening, and saying no felt like it would make it real. Everything at that table felt designed to sand her down. Every toast, every laugh, and every time Kenji put his hand on Sienna's back. Nora ate almost nothing. She drank water because she did not trust herself with wine tonight. She was on her second glass of water when she looked up and saw him again. He was seated at a table near the far wall, alone, which was unusual enough to notice. Every other table was full. His had 3 empty seats. He had a drink in front of him that he had not touched, and he was not looking at the newlyweds. He was looking at the room the way he had looked at the church, like a man reading a document, extracting information. And then he looked at her, and this time he did not look away when she caught him. He picked up the untouched drink, raised it very slightly, and held her gaze. It was not a toast. It was not flirtatious. It was something more direct than either of those things. It's something that said, "I see you clearly, and I am not pretending otherwise." Nora looked away. Her pulse had done something unexpected, and she did not have the bandwidth for unexpected things tonight. Dana appeared at her elbow during the salad course, crouching beside her chair. "Who is that man?" she whispered. "I don't know. He has been watching you since the church." "I know. Nora, he is extraordinarily attractive, and he is sitting alone at a table that seats 6 at a wedding where he appears to know no one. And he has been watching you since the church." "Dana, I am simply providing information. I don't have room for this tonight." Dana straightened. "You have exactly room for this tonight. You have infinite room for this tonight. Shh, tonight is the night you fill with anything that is not." She gestured broadly at the head table, at Kenji and Sienna, at the ivory roses, at all of it. Nora looked at the man again. He was still watching. And for the first time since she had walked into that church this morning, she felt something other than the particular numb horror of watching your life be reassembled around someone else. She felt curious. She excused herself from the table after the main course, slipping through the side door that led to the estate's garden terrace. She needed air. She needed 3 minutes outside this room where everything was simultaneously perfect and wrong. The terrace was empty. The garden stretched out in the dark, lit only by the distant glow of the hall's windows and a string of small lights someone had wound through the hedges. The night was cold enough to bite, and she had left her wrap at the table, but she did not go back for it. She heard the door open behind her. She did not turn around immediately. She gave herself 2 seconds because she already knew somehow who it was. You planned this wedding, the man said. His voice was low and even, a voice accustomed to making statements rather than guesses. She turned. He was closer than she had expected, maybe 6 feet away, jacket still on, drink in hand. This close, he was even more precisely, inconveniently striking, the kind of face that would be difficult to accurately describe afterward because the overall impression was too strong to break into parts. Yes, she said, because there was no point in denying it to someone who had already seen everything. He looked at her for a moment. Chuan and the groom was mine, yes. He did not say he was sorry. She was grateful for that. She had been receiving sympathy from Dana for 4 days, and it was beginning to feel like a second wound. What's your name? He asked. Nora. Rohan Kapoor, he said, and he held out his hand. She shook it because it seemed like the appropriate response, and his hand was warm and steady, and she did not let herself think about the last time a man's hand had felt like something she could rely on. Why are you here? She asked. You don't know anyone here. Something moved through his expression, brief and controlled. I know Kenji Ito, he said, not well enough for him to invite me, but well enough to have some interest in the kind of man he is. The way he said it made the cold night feel slightly colder. What kind of man is he? She asked. Rohan Kapoor looked at her steadily. The kind, he said, who takes things that don't belong to him and assumes no one will object. The hall behind them erupted in laughter at something the MC had said, and the sound of it carried out into the garden and dissolved in the dark. Nora stood in the cold and looked at this stranger who had watched her all day with the eyes of someone who already knew the shape of the story. And she understood suddenly and completely that Rohan Kapoor had not come to this wedding to watch Kenji Ito get married. He had come for another reason entirely, and whatever that reason was, it had just intersected with hers in a way that felt less like coincidence and more like the first move in something much larger than a wedding. Inside, the music started. Slow and romantic, the first dance. She knew the song. She had chosen it. She stayed where she was in the cold garden, and so did he. Rohan Kapoor did not look like a man who explained himself. Nora had been standing in this garden for less than 4 minutes with him, and she had already understood that much. He had the particular quality of someone who was accustomed to holding information the way other people held money, carefully, strategically, and only spending it when the return was worth it. She crossed her arms against the cold and looked at him directly. You said you know Kenji well enough to have interest in the kind of man he is. That is not an answer. That is a frame around where an answer should be. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. More like the recognition that she was not going to be manageable, and that this was not a problem for him. Kenji Ito has been embezzling from his company for 14 months, Rohan said. Not his company, technically. The company he manages on behalf of 3 silent investors. I am one of them. The garden felt very quiet suddenly. The distant music from the hall continued, muffled and warm, completely indifferent to what was happening out here. How much? Nora asked. Enough that this wedding makes sense, he said, and he looked back through the glass doors at the ivory roses and the golden lighting and the 300 guests eating the food she had chosen. He needed a different kind of alliance. Sienna Callahan's family has connections he requires right now. Her father controls 3 municipal contracts that Kenji needs to stay solvent for another 18 months while he covers his tracks. Nora turned this over slowly. It did not surprise her the way it might have surprised her 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, she had still believed Kenji was simply a man who had fallen out of love with her and into something with Sienna, which was devastating but at least human. Now she was looking at something colder and more deliberate, and the pieces were assembling themselves into a shape she did not want to look at directly. He was with me for 3 years, she said. I know. He proposed 11 months ago. I know that too. She looked at him sharply. How long have you been watching him? 8 months, Rohan said. Long enough to understand that you were not part of his plan. You were a placeholder while he arranged something more useful. The word placeholder landed like something physical. She did not let it show. She had spent the entire day not letting things show, and she was not going to stop now in front of a man she had known for 7 minutes. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you deserve to know what you were standing in the middle of without knowing it. He paused. And because I need something from you. There it was. She had felt it coming, the way you feel a drop in pressure before a storm. Nothing about Rohan Kapoor suggested he operated without purpose, and purpose always had a shape. "What do you need?" she asked. "You have access to his professional records," Rohan said. "Not the official ones, the ones he kept at home. I know he worked from the apartment, and I know he had a secondary filing system he did not keep on the company servers. Physical documents, a separate laptop, possibly both." Nora was very still. "You want me to get them for you? I want you to tell me if they exist and where they are. What happens after that is not your concern." She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity of it was almost impressive. This man had watched her walk down an aisle behind the woman who had stolen her life, had watched her sit through a reception for 3 hours with her face composed and her hands folded, and now he was standing in a cold garden asking her to hand him evidence like she was a resource he had identified and was now deploying. "You have been watching Kenji for 8 months, she said. "You came to his wedding uninvited. You have been watching me since the church, and your opening position is that you need something from me." "Yes. What do I get?" He looked at her as though the question pleased him in a way he had not anticipated. "What do you want?" She thought about the apartment key that no longer worked. She thought about the vows she had written being said in a voice she had trusted. She thought about Sienna calling her 2 months ago and asking her to be maid of honor, with warmth so practiced it had felt real. She thought about her Aunt Patricia in the front pew weeping with pride, and her own mother dabbing her eyes 3 rows back, and the fact that no one in that church had known what they were actually witnessing except Nora and Kenji and Sienna. "I want him to lose everything he used me to build," she said. Rohan Kapoor looked at her for a long moment. "Then we want the same thing," he said. She should have said she needed time to think. She should have said she did not know him and had no reason to trust him, and that allying herself with a billionaire she had met in a garden at her ex-fiancé's wedding was not a rational decision. She knew all of that. She was a rational person. She had always been a rational person. "The laptop is in the second bedroom," she said. "He used it as a home office. The laptop is a matte black ThinkPad, older model. He kept it in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, which he locked but kept the key in the back of the same drawer because he trusted security theater over actual security. The physical files are in a box he labeled Tax Returns 2019, which is on the shelf above the cabinet." Rohan did not write any of this down. He listened with the focused attention of someone who did not need to. "There is one problem," Nora said. "The lock change." "Yes. I have a way around that," he said, and did not elaborate. She believed him. That was the strange part. She had known this man for less than 15 minutes, and she believed him in the uncomplicated way you believe a fact, not because you want to, but because the available evidence supports it. The garden door opened behind them, and Dana appeared, wrapping her own arms against the cold, looking from Nora to Rohan with an expression that was 1 part concern and 2 parts intense curiosity. "They are about to do the cake cutting," Dana said. "And Sienna has been asking where you are." Of course she had. Sienna needed her audience complete. She needed Nora in the room and smiling and present so that the image was whole, so that what they had done to her could be witnessed and verified and recorded in photographs she would have to look at for the rest of her life. Nora looked at Rohan. He was watching her with those steady dark eyes and saying nothing, letting her make the choice, which she understood was itself a kind of information. He was not the kind of man who pushed. "I have to go back in," she said. "I know. We should not be seen leaving together." "Agreed, go ahead." She moved toward the door and then stopped. "How do I reach you?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card. Plain, heavy stock, just a name and a number. No company. No title. She took it and felt the weight of it, which was somehow more than a card should weigh. "Nora," he said as she reached for the door handle. She turned. "You did not cry today," he said. Not as a compliment, just as an observation, stated with something that might have been respect. She went back inside. The cake cutting was exactly as awful as she had anticipated. Sienna laughed and fed Kenji a piece with practiced sweetness, and the photographer circled them like a satellite, and the guests applauded, and Nora stood at the correct angle with the correct expression and thought about a matte black ThinkPad in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet in an apartment where her key no longer worked. She was still thinking about it 2 hours later when the reception began to wind down and guests started moving toward the exit in small, satisfied groups. She had endured the bouquet toss, which Sienna had aimed with suspicious precision at the cluster of bridesmaids, and the last dance and 3 separate conversations with relatives who told her she looked wonderful and that she would find someone soon, as though her problem were loneliness rather than betrayal. She was collecting her wrap from the back of her chair when Greg Lawson appeared beside her. Kenji's best man, the pleasant, oblivious man who smelled like too much cologne. Except the way he was looking at her right now was not oblivious at all. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he said quietly. His voice had lost the cheerful, his slightly loud quality it had carried all evening. She looked at him. "About what?" He glanced around. The hall was thinning. "About why a man like Rohan Kapoor showed up uninvited to Kenji's wedding," he said, "and about why he spent 20 minutes in the garden with you." The wrap went cold in her hands. "I saw you," Greg said, "and I need you to understand something before you make a decision you cannot take back. Rohan Kapoor is not what he appears to be. Whatever he told you tonight, whatever he offered you, there is a version of this story he did not share." She stared at Greg Lawson, this man she had catalogued as harmless and peripheral, and understood that she had made a mistake. Not about Rohan, not yet, but about Greg. Because the man standing in front of her now was not the best man who had smelled like too much cologne and talked about the venue. He was someone who had been watching Rohan the same way Rohan had been watching the room. "What version?" she asked. Greg looked at her with something that was almost pity. "Rohan Kapoor was engaged once," he said. 3 years ago. The woman left him for someone else. He has been dismantling that man's life ever since, piece by piece, and he does not particularly care who gets caught in the wreckage." The hall was nearly empty now. The caterers were moving between tables, clearing glasses. The ivory roses were beginning to wilt at the edges. "Who was the man?" Nora asked, though some cold part of her had already begun to form the answer. Greg held her gaze. "Kenji Ito," he said. The floor did not move, and the room did not spin. Nora Callahan stood very still in a half-empty reception hall at a wedding she had planned for herself, and understood that she was not a partner in what Rohan Kapoor was building. She was the latest weapon he had found. And the worst part, the part that made her press her thumbnail hard into her palm again, was that she still had his card in her hand, and she had not yet decided whether that changed anything. Nora stood in the emptying hall for exactly 30 seconds after Greg Lawson walked away, and then she made a decision. She called the number on the card. Rohan picked up on the second ring, which told her he had been expecting it, which told her something else entirely about how carefully he had calculated this evening. "Greg Lawson just told me you were engaged 3 years ago," she said, "and that the man who ended that engagement was Kenji Ito, and that you have been taking his life apart piece by piece ever since." A pause. Not the pause of a man caught. The pause of a man deciding how much truth was now required. "Where are you?" he said. "Still at the estate." "Stay there. I am in the parking lot." He ended the call before she could respond, which under any other circumstances would have irritated her deeply. She walked to the main entrance and pushed through the heavy doors into the cold night air, and he was already there, leaning against a car that was dark and low and expensive, in the same quiet way his suit was expensive. Arms crossed, watching her cross the distance between them. She stopped 3 feet away. "Is it true?" "Parts of it," he said. "Which parts?" "I was engaged," he said. Her name was Priya. She and Kenji met at a conference I introduced them at. By the time I understood what was happening between them, it was already decided." She left. Kenji moved on to the next useful thing, which appears to be a pattern of his. Nora absorbed this. "And the rest of it. The taking his life apart." Rohan looked at her steadily. "I am a silent investor in a company whose funds are being stolen. Pursuing that is not vengeance. It is what any investor would do." Greg made it sound more personal than that. "Greg Lawson has been Kenji's closest friend for 11 years, Rohan said. "He has known about the embezzlement for at least 6 of the 14 months it has been happening. He is not warning you out of concern. He is warning you because he is afraid of what you might help me find." She looked at him. The cold was sharper now, deep into the night, and the estate behind her had gone quiet, the last of the guests filtering out, the lights inside beginning to dim as the catering staff worked through their closing tasks. "You should have told me," she said. "Before you asked me for anything, you should have told me your connection to Kenji." "Yes," he said, simply, directly, without qualification. She had expected him to justify it. The absence of justification did something unexpected to her certainty about how angry she was. "It would have changed whether you trusted me," he said. "I made a calculation. It was the wrong one. It was a manipulation." "Yes." She turned away from him and looked out at the dark parking lot, at the long row of cars belonging to people who were by now in their own homes, warm and uncomplicated. He having attended a wedding and eaten good food and danced and gone home without any of this. She thought about Priya, a woman she did not know, who had presumably stood somewhere 3 years ago in the same position Nora was standing in now, on the other side of something Kenji Ito had done. She thought about the fact that Kenji had done this before, had taken something from someone and moved on without looking back, had treated a person's life as a temporary arrangement until something more convenient became available. He had done it to Rohan. He had done it to her. And the only difference between them was that Rohan had spent 3 years building something in response, and Nora was 17 hours in and still standing in the parking lot of the venue she had booked. She turned back. What happens if I give you access to those files?" "I take the evidence to the other two investors and to the relevant authorities," Rohan said. "Kenji faces fraud charges. The company is restructured. The Callahan family connection becomes a liability rather than an asset because the municipal contracts he married into cannot survive the scrutiny that comes with a federal investigation." "Sienna," Nora said. "Will have married a man who is about to lose everything," Rohan said. "That is not something I engineered. That is the natural consequence of the choices she and Kenji made." Nora thought about Sienna at the altar tonight, radiant and composed, and about the phone call 2 months ago. "I want you there for the most important day of my life." Ran about every family dinner and holiday and shared childhood memory that existed in the space between them, all of it now sitting on top of what Sienna had done, like furniture arranged over a rotting floor. "I want one thing," Nora said. Rohan waited. "When it happens, when the investigation starts and the story comes out, I do not want to be described as a source or a whistleblower or a woman scorned who handed over documents. I want to be invisible in this. Whatever you do with what I give you, my name stays out of it." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I want that in writing." Something moved through his expression again, that not quite smile. He reached into his jacket and produced his phone, opened a document, typed 4 sentences, and handed it to her. It was brief and direct and legally coherent in the way that only something written by a person with very good lawyers in their recent history could be. She read it twice, handed it back, watched him sign it digitally, and send it to a number he asked her to provide. Her phone buzzed. The document arrived in her messages. "The apartment," she said. "You said you had a way around the lock change." "I have a locksmith," he said, "and I have a legal basis for entry because my name is on a document Kenji filed with the company 8 months ago, listing the apartment address as a secondary business location. It is thin, but it is enough." She almost smiled at the precision of it. 8 months of preparation, assembled into something that could be deployed in a single evening. They drove separately. She gave him the address, which he already knew, which she decided not to comment on. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets carrying only the specific sparse traffic of very late or very early. And she drove with both hands on the wheel and the card on the passenger seat, and Rohan's tail lights 2 cars ahead of her. The apartment building looked exactly as it always had. She had lived there with Kenji for 2 years. She knew the sound the elevator made, and the way the hallway smelled, and the particular quality of the silence inside Unit 14C at midnight. Standing in the corridor outside, it now felt like standing outside a version of her life that had been condemned. The locksmith Rohan had called was already there, a compact, efficient woman who asked no questions and had the door open in under 4 minutes. Rohan thanked her and she left. And then it was just the two of them standing in the entrance of Kenji's apartment. It was different. Small things, but Nora noticed all of them. A photograph on the entryway table that had not been there before. Kenji and Sienna, laughing on a beach somewhere warm. Her books were gone from the living room shelf. The throw blanket she had bought at a market in Lisbon 3 years ago was gone from the couch. Everything of hers had been removed with the thoroughness of someone who wanted no evidence that she had ever been part of this space. She walked directly to the second bedroom without stopping to look at anything else. The filing cabinet was where she had left it, in her memory and in the room. Bottom drawer. The key was in the back of the drawer exactly as she had described. As she unlocked it and pulled it open, and the ThinkPad was there. Matte black, older model, exactly where it had always been. She handed it to Rohan. The box labeled Tax Returns 2019 was on the shelf above. She lifted it down and opened it, and the files were there. 12 months of physical records that Kenji had kept off the company servers because some instinct for self-preservation had told him to keep one copy he could control. Rohan went through it with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. She watched him work and thought about the 3 years he had spent building toward this moment, and about Priya, and about the particular loneliness of being wronged by someone and having no immediate recourse, only time and patience and the slow accumulation of leverage. She understood that loneliness very well. She had been living inside a version of it for 6 weeks. "It is here," he said quietly. He was looking at a document in the file, and his voice had changed slightly, carrying the particular flatness of confirmation after a long search. "All of it. Then you have what you came for," she said. He looked up from the file. In the low light of the apartment's secondary bedroom, surrounded by the organized evidence of what Kenji had done, he looked at her differently than he had in the garden or the parking lot. The strategic distance was still there, but something behind it had shifted, the way a room looks different once the furniture has been moved. "I am sorry," he said, "for the way I approached you tonight. Hush, you deserved a cleaner version of this." "I deserved not to be at that wedding at all," she said. "But here we are." He set the file down. "What do you do now?" It was the first time he had asked her something without an agenda behind it, or at least that was how it felt. She thought about it honestly. "I find a new apartment," she said. "I call my mother tomorrow and have a conversation I have been postponing for 6 weeks. I go back to work on Monday and I let time do what time does." She paused. "And I stop planning other people's weddings and start making decisions about my own life." "You are a wedding planner," he said. "I was," she said. "I think I might be something else now. I have not decided." He nodded slowly as though this made sense to him in a way he did not need to articulate. She appreciated that. She had spent enough time with people who needed everything explained. They left the apartment with the laptop and the files, and the locksmith sealed the door behind them as though none of it had happened. In the corridor, under the fluorescent hum of the building's lighting, Rohan held the evidence that would unravel Kenji Ito's carefully constructed life, and Nora stood with her hands empty for the first time all day. "The legal process will take time," Rohan said. "Months, possibly more." "I know. There may be moments where your connection to Kenji becomes relevant to the investigation. If that happens, I will handle it." "You do not need to protect me," she said. "I know," he said. "I intend to anyway." She looked at him in the corridor light. With this man who had walked into her worst day with a purpose that was not entirely clean, and a history that was not entirely simple, and who had nonetheless been the only person in that church who had seen her clearly and been angry on her behalf without being asked to. "Rohan," she said. He waited. "If this works, when it works, I would like to know." "I will tell you personally," he said. She took the elevator down and walked out into the night and got into her car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The city moved around her, indifferent and continuous. Somewhere across town, Kenji Ito was in a hotel suite with Nora Callahan, beginning a marriage built on borrowed time and stolen money, completely unaware that the foundation had already been pulled. 6 weeks later, and on a Tuesday morning that looked like every other Tuesday morning, Nora's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. "It is done," Rohan said. "The authorities were contacted this morning. Kenji's accounts are frozen. The investigation is formal as of an hour ago." She sat down slowly. "And the Callahan contracts. Under review. It will not survive scrutiny." She was quiet for a moment. Outside her new apartment window, the city was doing what cities do, moving and indifferent and full of people living their uncomplicated mornings. "Thank you for calling," she said. "I said I would tell you personally." A pause opened between them, comfortable in the way that pauses between people who have been through something together can be comfortable. "There is a restaurant," he said, that I have been meaning to try. It requires a reservation made approximately 6 weeks in advance, which I made approximately 6 weeks ago, on a night when I was standing in a garden at a wedding I was not invited to. She was quiet for a moment. That is either very confident or very presumptuous. I have been told it is both, he said. She looked out the window at the Tuesday morning, at the ordinary light falling on the street below, at the city carrying on in its uncomplicated way. What time, she said. She did not spend the next 3 hours deciding what to wear or rehearsing what she would say. She made coffee and sat with it and thought about the version of herself who had walked into a church 11 weeks ago in a pale green dress with a smile like a wound. And about the version of herself sitting here now in a new apartment with a phone call that had just closed one chapter and quietly, without announcement, opened another. She was not the same person. That was not a tragedy. That was the whole point. She put on something she liked, not something chosen to impress or to signal recovery or to prove anything to anyone. Something she simply liked. And she picked up her keys and her phone, and she went. If this story moved you, made you angry, or made you smile at that last line, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me which moment got you the most, and if you want to see Nora and Rohan in a full new story, say the word and I will write it.